Hi, this is Barry, and welcome to the Simplicity Zen podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'd appreciate if you could take a moment to like and subscribe to the video. That helps motivate YouTube to distribute it to more people, so that would be very helpful. If you're watching or if you're listening, like most people do through the podcast applications, you can go to simplicityzen.com, and sign up there for the mailing list. Today, my guest is Myoen Birnbaum. Dan is a teacher who received Dharma Transmission from Diane Eshin Rizzetto in 2019. He is a member of the Ordinary Mind Zen School, the White Plum Asanga, American Zen Teachers Association, the Lay Zen Teachers Association, and he's a teacher at the Bay Zen Center in Oakland, California. Thanks for being here today with us, Dan.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and you were a researcher for child cancer. Is that correct?
No, I was a pediatric neurologist.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of someone else. Sorry. Yeah. I'd be curious, before we kind of dive into the Zen stuff, could you talk a little bit about what that was and what you did?
So I worked at Children's Hospital in Oakland for about more than 30 years. When Children's Hospital became part of UCSF, I became part of UCSF. So I sort of finished my career there as a professor of neurology, which was pretty weird. But for the most part, what I did is took care of children with a variety of neurological disorders, epilepsy, seizure disorders, and I ran the department also. I was the division director, so I got lots of practice dealing with all kinds of administrative things also.
Probably good training for helping run a Zen center.
Yes, and the Zen Center was good training for dealing with all of that, both the difficulties in medicine and also with everything that arose as part of running the department. And actually, I was on the board of the Zen Center for years and served on other boards in the hospital, but it was quite wonderful being on the Zen Center board because we had this wonderful process and way of listening to each other that wasn't present in a lot of the other meetings I attended and as part of my job at Children's Hospital. So it was really nice to have that opportunity to sort of bring that in.
What year did you start attending Bay Zen Center?
2008, I believe.
Okay, yeah. So that was a couple of years before I moved. Yeah. As you probably remember, I used to practice Diane and Bay Zen Center. I think I was there from like 2001 to maybe 2004 or something like that, 2003.
Oh, so I probably just missed you then.
Yeah. I ended up, my position got eliminated at the company I worked at. So I really abruptly moved to Sacramento, live with my then girlfriend, my now wife. So, yes, I did. So
you had to pull up your Dharma roots also then.
Yeah. So, did you grow up in the Bay Area?
Not really. I grew up sort of from high school on in Southern California. And before that in South Carolina for a while, and was born in Denver.
Oh, interesting. So you moved from South Carolina to California? Yeah, that's pretty similar to me. I moved when I was 14 from Maryland to Southern California, Ventura County, and that was a frightful culture shock for me.
It was for me. It was a refreshing change. I always felt out of place in South Carolina. It was just the South. It has its own sort of cultural way about it, and I never quite fit into it. I was never quite that comfortable with it, and so it was actually very nice to move back to California for me.
What part of
a hard time with it though, for the opposite reasons.
Part of LA was it?
Sort of, I kind of was in Upland, which is out toward, what's around there, Ontario, that
Oh, okay, yeah.
inland area there, and went to high school there, and then went to school at UC Riverside for undergraduate, and then back to UCLA, for medical school.
What's your cultural and kind of ethnic background, if you don't mind me asking?
So I was, my parents are both Jewish, and so but we're not super religious. They really were not very very connected with the whole thing. They did give us some basic training, but I wasn't really exposed that much to it in the sort of depth. And then but I always had an interest in it. And as I got into college, I was really starting to explore a lot of things, my Jewish heritage, and also began looking at a lot of other things, Buddhism, Taoism, all kinds of things. And for a while, really went down sort of exploring my Jewish tradition. My wife grew up in a more traditional, more orthodox background, not completely, and they didn't practice as much either, but she was exposed much more and has a deeper commitment to it than I did.
Did you have like a bar mitzvah and stuff like that?
I did not have one when I was 13. I went through the training. And then as I began sort of exploring it more, as my kids were getting into sort of bar mitzvah type age, I said, I'm asking them to do this, I should do it. So I actually did the whole thing, I think, probably shortly before I began really branching off into exploring Zen and Buddhism and all that. But I really felt like I should explore my own tradition first. And I did. I got bar mitzvah training and was, a Torah reader for our synagogue and the whole thing. And, it was, and from there, I really started trying to branch out into sort of the mystical Jewish tradition, because I was kind of had that sort of interest. And there was a fellow who was teaching some of the time at our synagogue who wrote a book about sort of the meditative tradition in Judaism. And I just began sort of exploring it that way. And so that was sort of my introduction to it. He subsequently sort of started his own shul, his own synagogue in the Bay Area called Chochmat Halev. And my wife and I are still members there.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you probably were raised in fairly atheist.
My father was definitely atheist or kind of agnostic. He really didn't, my father was a very, what's the word for it? He was brilliant. He was a mathematician and taught mathematics at Cal Poly Pomona, and was really, really very penetrating in his reasoning, and just didn't connect with the whole thing, I think. And it was very difficult to sound him out on what his beliefs actually were, though. That was the other thing.
Maybe he never really articulated it.
Yeah, I never could really get to it, and the discussions were always difficult to have, so I don't think I explored them that much. He was much more comfortable talking about mathematics and rockets and physics and all kinds of things like that. So.
How about your mom?
My mom also, I don't think, had a very deep connection to the whole thing. So there wasn't a lot of strong religion background in our family as I was growing up. And my siblings kind of the same.
Would you ever think about religious or spiritual things as a kid or a teenager?
I think I did actually. I certainly had this wanting to know kind of inquiry sort of mechanism that was clearly going, and I was reading a lot. But I grew up in this household that really valued very, I don't know, what's the word for it? A real connection with sort of reasoning and logic. And so discussions about things that didn't fit into that were much more difficult to sort of have. Yeah.
How would you characterize your childhood and teenage years? Were you bright? Were you like cheerful and happy, shy and
I was generally pretty happy. I'm a bit of an introvert, actually, probably a lot of an introvert, which is a strange position for somebody who's trying to run a Zen center, but I am.
Sorry to interject, but you'd be, I've done a lot of these interviews now, and I would say most of the teachers kind of characterize themselves as introverts, which I find really interesting.
Interesting. It's really interesting, actually, because one of the things about Zen training and Buddhist training in general is you kind of don't leave things out and go toward what is not comfortable. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's part of what got me where I am. But as back as your question goes, in high school, I was, I had friends, but we were all, really doing a lot of science. I was really into science. I loved it. I grew up, as I said, surrounded by, a lot of love for science and math. And as I got into high school, I really loved it. And so I did a lot of that. I was quite studious, worked really hard, got good grades and all that sort of thing. And part of that, I think, is I closed some of this down. But I remember it as I was, even in high school, I was kind of had this curiosity for different spiritual type things. I remember doing a comparative religion class in high school and being really interested in all of that. And it was fascinating for me. So clearly there was a spark already there, I think.
Do you think you were kind of generally content with life, or did you kind of feel a sense of lacking, or were you just so busy with your work you weren't really even cognizing it? Or
I was that's an interesting question. I wouldn't call myself discontent, but I was really goal-oriented. I was so focused on, I didn't know what I exactly wanted to do. I kind of had envisioned myself as doing something quite scientific, running a laboratory or being, really in something, because that was sort of what I grew up around, and that was what was valued in my house. And it wasn't really until I got to college that I began to sort of question all of that. Things started to, you get to college and first of all, it wasn't at home all of the time, and I was exposed to a lot more things, and it started to shake apart a little bit, I think. And I don't remember being deeply unhappy or anything, just really focused and goal-oriented on, I'm going to succeed at this.
Yeah, at risk of being a cheesy armchair psychologist, do you think like a bit of your self-worth was kind of like tied up in the goal-oriented drive and like self-identity and so forth like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was, academic achievement was really valued in my family, and so and my self-worth was sort of there, and I did well in high school, but when you get to college, the game changes quite a bit, and there's a lot more smarter people around, so it just got really difficult. And I remember when the other thing that was really weird for me is when I was in elementary school, I had a lot of difficulty with math, which was very difficult because my father was this brilliant mathematician. And I had this algebra teacher in middle school who, I don't know what he did, but he opened the door. And I was able to do math after that, really do math. And I was good at it all the way through into college. And then it got hard again when we started doing calculus, and I had difficulty with it again. And things started to get more difficult. It was more difficult to succeed. And then I think that led to the question, well, what is success here really? And what do I really want to do here? And I wasn't really sure that I wanted to be in a laboratory and all of those things that my whole sort of childhood, this is the way my life is going kind of thing was organized. It just, it didn't fit anymore. It wasn't fitting the reality of what I was seeing around me in college. And so I think that's really where things started to shake out. And then at the same time, I recall doing a lot more spiritual reading around, what do I doing here? Where do I go? And what should I do?
What from that reading kind of resonated with you?
So because I was still most comfortable with my own Jewish tradition. I remember reading a lot of Jewish spirituality, and I would read, Martin Buber and people like that who are really difficult to understand, and also some of the more traditional Jewish sources, and I always liked the sort of kind of ethical background of the whole thing. I just took a lot of solace in that, and then like the way it sort of interfaced with this kind of bigger, unknown, mysterious part that was hard to pin down and understand. And I think it was sort of branching between those two that really I found a lot of comfort in when I was kind of hitting this, what do I do with my life thing in college.
Was it all philosophy, or was there actually any practice?
I was not really practicing very much. I've got to say it was mostly philosophy. And there was, I don't remember doing a lot of what I would consider spiritual practice at that time, which is interesting.
Did you go through like a party or psychedelic phase or anything like that?
I didn't actually. I was surrounded by it. I was surrounded by lots of people getting high, and lived in dorms for a while, and people were always, but I didn't connect with it. I didn't like it. Get drunk every once in a while, but nothing like what was going on around me. And like I said, I was pretty goal-oriented, still straightforward. And then kind of went through this crisis in my sophomore year of college about, well, what the heck am I going to do? I'm not sure I really want to be in a lab. And there was this program going on at UC Riverside where if you were in this program, you could kind of transition into the UCLA Medical School. And the idea was you had to opt into it from the beginning, but I didn't opt into it. And then they had this kind of window where they didn't have enough people in it that they thought were going to actually succeed, and they opened it up. And lot of the classes were classes I was already taking. So I said, okay, I'll try this. And remember still being very uncertain whether it was the right decision, but I figured I could always change if it didn't work out. And so
if you stuck with it, what did you see as the end game? Being like a clinician
I was still have this idea that I was going to do some sort of research type job and was still headed in that direction. And obviously my interests shifted over time to doing more clinical type work. So yeah.
So then from there, I presume you went on to medical school, did your rotations.
Yes. Yeah. And then and I wasn't sure what I was going to do during those either. I was really, for a while, I was thinking I was going to be a psychiatrist. But I'd had really good neuroscience training in my medical school curriculum and liked it. And I also really loved my pediatric rotation. It was just, that was like, when there's just something about working with children. It was just so wonderful. They're just so alive and open. And at that point, I sort of decided I was going to become a pediatrician and still just
before you had kids.
Yeah, my daughter was born during my first year of pediatric residency. So it was before I had kids. It was just the joy of working with children and doing the medicine with children was just so much fun.
And was your wife like a college sweetheart or?
No, we met when I was in my first year of residency, and so yeah.
And so, what kind of medical work did you end up doing? Were you a surgeon or did you?
No, I worked as a pediatrician, so I did a pediatric residency, and I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do with my pediatric training. I thought about going into just doing general pediatric practice. But as I said, I really like the neurosciences, and I still have this kind of academic sort of leaning. And my role models, some of them were neurologists in the center I was training in. And so I kind of did a fellowship in neurology after that.
Mm-hmm. And what years were the neurology?
Oh, you mean it's sort of I sort of finished.
Was it like 80s or 90s or
80s? I finished I finished medical school in 88 and I finished medical school earlier than that. I finished my residency in 1990. So yeah, so I was ready to go to work in 1990. I had been doing training for years after, that finished.
Yeah, so you went on to become a pediatrician. You did neurology, you got married, you had kids, and so you're saying when your kids were kind of working towards bar and bar mitzvah, presumably boys and girls.
Boys and girls.
Yeah. So you started looking into more the Jewish mysticism. Was mysticism the right word, or?
Yeah. So a lot of Jewish meditation is based on Kabbalistic type meditations that have this whole complicated system, and I didn't understand it as well. I had a pretty good grounding in Judaism by that point and had really done quite a bit of study on my own. But the Kabbalistic stuff was quite difficult to understand. I found it very abstract and was really not satisfied with it. I just didn't feel like it was giving me everything I needed. And I'd started kind of exploring other meditative techniques to sort of get a deeper understanding of what it was pointing to. I remember one teacher that I attended some day-long retreats with, and they were Jewish meditation retreats. And he taught kind of a breath practice that used the Shema, which is a prayer, as a sort of three-part in-out thing with the, and I got really concentrated doing that. Looking back, that's what happened. Is it's a very
Samadhi.
concentrating. It's like a mantra meditation on the breath, and I was going, oh, there's something here.
Is that more of a contemporary gloss on the tradition, or does that actually go back to the earlier?
I think it actually is an ancient technique, and I actually don't know the history of all of the Jewish meditation techniques as well as I probably should, but I'm pretty sure that was actually, I think it's actually pretty ancient. He didn't introduce it as something that was new, but it was fairly powerful, I've got to say. And I was at that point really wanting to do deeper meditation practice, and Spirit Rock is just right here. So I started dipping my feet in the water by taking day-long retreats and classes at Spirit Rock.
So are you based out of Marin then when you say right here, or do you just mean the Bay Area in general?
The Bay Area, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We were living up here by that point, and had moved up here and taken this job at Children's Hospital in the early 90s. And so it was right here, and I was still a little bit conflicted about the whole thing. Do I branch out from my Jewish tradition into this very Buddhist tradition? But I just had to know. I just had this, at that point, there's fire to sort of explore this. It really started, and I just had to know. And so I started, attending day-long retreats there, and then 7-day retreats there, and 10-day retreats, and really, and for years, my practice was doing, a 7 to 10-day retreat twice a year, and then going to sit with James Barres, who's one of their teachers, who has a group in Berkeley on I think it was Thursday nights or something like that. And so I would go there, and then I would go to retreats. And at the same time, I was still doing a lot of the sort of traditional Jewish practice. So I was doing both of them together, and sort of really, it took me a long time to sort of get that they weren't mutually exclusive. I really had to kind of cross that hump, and it took a long time though. I was, am I a Buddhist, or am I? It was like this identity thing that was just.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm curious, in your medical work, starting from when you first started doing your residency and stuff, did seeing people in kind of life and death situations, or maybe you must have as a resident. Did that kind of ignite any sort of like existential questioning or anything like that in you? And if so, could you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
I think it did. So neurology, pediatric neurology, it's evolved quite a bit over the time of my career, but especially back when I started, there are a lot of miserable diagnoses. There still are, where there's very little you can do for the diagnosis itself. There's always something you can do. There's always something you can offer. But as far as being able to actually fundamentally affect the course of the disorder, there are a lot of things that were quite terrible. Really. I have a memory of going off to a retreat, a 7-day retreat, after giving this family a diagnosis that their kid had a disorder of their muscles that was probably going to be fatal within a period of a few years. And I remember the whole retreat was like just, tears with that. I think that there was clearly a lot of needing to process the suffering, grief, and hardship that I was seeing in my patients and their families. I remember when I first started doing, more prolonged retreats, usually about 2 to 3 days in, often in the morning, there would be a sitting, and it would be almost spontaneous. It would just start. I would just weep for my patients. They would be one after the other. They would just come up and come up. And the first few years, it was more. It was like this grief and sadness and sorrow was unprocessed, unacknowledged, and the quiet space and just being present and quiet allowed it to arise and be met. And it didn't necessarily make it better, but there's something that shifted from holding it in versus allowing it. That stopped happening as much. It was really interesting. It was the first few years of and sometimes things that would come up would be things from years back, even when I was in medical school, and they had been there and this hadn't been. So I really think that that was probably there, and maybe that actually was what was pushing me toward this practice and this path.
Prior to the practice, were you seeing any like compassion fatigue in yourself, like kind of as a defense mechanism?
Yeah, I would definitely, through residency, I wasn't, doing this practice until really much further on. So through residency, I would deal with being burned out and compassion fatigue, and not really having, I think, processed and met the difficulty that I was, encountering in my medical practice. Yeah.
So I'm curious, at some point you turned towards, Buddhism. Do you remember what it was that sparked your initial awareness of it? Was there a book that really resonated with you, or a teacher that you, like something caught your attention? Do you remember what it was?
I'm trying to think back. So I have this memory of, so I'm a really voracious reader, and it's really hard for me to say exactly what it was I read. I have this memory of starting to look at Buddhist books because I was interested in this meditative path. And I remember looking at some point at Thich Nhat Hanh's book, The Miracle of Mindfulness. That book is deceptively simple. I mean, you just say, oh, this is so easy. It's so clear. And it is very clear, and it's very direct. And it's also the heart of the path. I mean, it's just bam, right there. And that book, I think, really changed my whole approach to this, dichotomy thing between Judaism and Buddhism that I was trying to work out. And then at some point, not very far off of that, I wound up reading Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And I think that also made a great impression on me. And the teachers at Spirit Rock, they're all fabulous. I mean, they were all really wonderful. And I would attend the retreats and listen to, at that point, it was tapes of their talks. And but the ones who really, I think, had the biggest impact on me were Joseph Goldstein, James Barris, because I was listening to him every week, and the other practice that really resonated with me and still does is the Brahma Vihara practice.
Mhm.
And I sat at a retreat with Sharon Salzberg and read her books. And I think that actually really had a big impact on me also. Those practices, they, really opened my heart up. And I think made a huge impression on me in my subsequent practice.
If I went and kind of like visited you, if I had a time machine and went and visited you on a random day and like interviewed you while we were sitting, like what chances are what would have been your practice? Were you doing like insight meditation? Were you,
You mean back then?
yeah, like what was your core kind of?
So I was doing mostly insight vipassana type meditation, following my breathing. And at some point, I did a 7-day metta retreat. And that became very integral to my practice also. So I was doing some of my practice as, just insight meditation on the breath. And then more, formal metta practice, going through different categories and in all of the Brahma Viharas also. So I was doing
So would you kind of memorize the script and then go through it in your head, or would you
I
listen
had
to them?
phrases that I used, still do. May you be happy, and I had the usual way it's done is to start either with yourself or somebody who's like somebody who's a great support to you, or a benefactor they call it, and then sort of move outward. I still think that's a very powerful practice, and still teach it.
Yeah. When I lead a little kind of like qigong and like mindfulness sessions up here in the foothills, and when I do it, I always start with like think of someone that you feel unconditional love for, so it seems like that anchors people really well.
Yeah. It just needs something to open the door a little bit, and
Yeah.
kind of get that flowing, and then it can move outward. So beautiful.
So so you were, sounds like you were pretty established at with the Vipassana and with that group. What kind of tickled your fancy with Zen? Like, how did you make that switch?
So two things. One is I did a day long with Ajay Shanti.
Mm-hmm.
And he is his training, actually, I learned subsequently, I didn't realize this, came from somebody who'd actually studied with Maezumi Roshi. I didn't know that until recently, but he clearly had a lot of Zen influence in his training, although his teaching is really much more just non-dual and doesn't have, I think, probably has many traditions in it. But the day I went to this sitting, I was sitting, I got there late and I was seated right in front of him. And it was quite powerful just being in his presence for the whole day. And so I sat with him for a while, and both Spirit Rock and Ajay Shanti's groups were very big. They're huge, and hundreds of people. And I learned a lot. And I used to attend his retreats for a year or two. And I think I was really looking to head more toward maybe this more non-dual, absolute.
The inquiry aspect of it?
Yeah, that also, I think. But at the same time, I was starting to get it that I needed to be in a smaller group. And there was a group out here that was run by somebody who had some Zen training, Michael McAllister. He still runs it. It's called, what's it called? Infinite Smile. And he's a great teacher. And it was not a big group at the time, maybe 30, 40 people. And we would do retreats. And he would do, one-on-one interviews. And I kind of got it that I needed a teacher. I needed to be in a small group. And but I wanted to do the precept training, as I mentioned, that I had this sort of love for the ethical aspect of it and really wanted to take the precepts. And he didn't have authorization to do that. So at that point, I started looking for another center where I could have a teacher who would give me the precepts. Tried a few different places. I think I visited Berkeley Zen Center, and then I visited Bay Zen Center and really liked the whole atmosphere, the place, the group. Diane's teaching really said, okay, this is going to be it for me for a while. And so,
had you had any exposure to Joko Beck's teachings prior to Bay Center?
I had read her books, but I can't say that that was the reason that
they didn't stick out to you. That was just one of many books.
I really liked Joko's books, but I can't say that was it. I was really looking for a center where I felt like I could receive training that would help me, further my practice and my ability to practice with other people. And was a little intimidated by the whole Zen thing, that I hadn't, because I'd been doing, Vipassana, didn't know the forms, and we weren't facing the wall, and we weren't sitting with our eyes open. I was not used to any of that. And, but there was just so much desire to really be in a Sangha that was, so it didn't matter. At that point, I just said, okay, this is the place.
Was this your first exposure to the kind of the genre of regular Dokusan with the teacher and developing that kind of intimacy?
Yes. I'd done some with Michael McAllister. And so I was that was the first time I'd really seen that. Spirit Rock offers individual interviews, but they're usually once or twice in the course of a 7 to 10 day retreat. And there's not a lot of so much working one-on-one with a teacher over a period of time. I think it's available there, but I never could seem to get into that versus Zen, where that's a bigger part of the
central, I think, in some ways, because there's lots of intense meditation. I mean, maybe I'm soapboxing a little bit, but what I really like about Zen, and at least how it's manifested in contemporary times, is it's relational. It's about people interacting together. It's not just about sitting. I think that's a really important part of it.
No, I think that that isn't what got me in the door of Bay Zen Center, but I think that's what kept me there. I was trying to figure out, what was missing. What's missing here? I was going to all these retreats and I was sitting in these big groups, and then I got it in this smaller Sangha that no, I need to be around a bunch of people and actually interact with them, not just go to the retreat, do the retreat in silence, get in my car and go home, which was what was happening. And the other part of this, the training at Bay Zen Center, and I know other Zen centers, is the practice positions that really are so beautiful, and how they just put us up against ourselves. This, oh, you're going to be the timekeeper, and you're going to ring that bell, and guess what? You're going to mess up. Guess what's going to happen? You're going to make a mistake ringing that bell in front of 15, 20 other people. And how are you going to meet that? It was wonderful, and then to have somebody like Diane to sort of say, yeah, there it is. Why is it bothering you so much that you forgot to ring that bell, or that you didn't sound it the way you should? What's up with that? And it just becomes this whole window into the mind heart that's so clear. So yes, I think what you're saying is exactly right. It's really the relational part of it, and being part of a sangha and working with other people, that is so rich, in the setting of a place that is committed to an environment of inquiry and support of the inquiry.
Had Diane already written her precepts book at that point?
Yes, the first one, the book on the precepts, was had been published before I joined, and I don't think I'd read it either. Maybe I had, but I certainly hadn't gone through it the way we did when I took the precepts with her.
And so, could you talk a little bit about the precept process that you went through and how that worked?
So our process is to usually do it over a year or so, taking each one almost like a koan, to really say, well, what does this mean, and what does it mean in my life, and how is it showing up? And her book is really wonderful as sort of a guide to that process, because she has, exercises and ways to practice with each one. And then the other part of it is to restate it in your own words. And it's not so much that you come up with some brilliant restatement of the precept, but that there's this work that has to happen to actually say, well, how would I say it? And for me, and I know for other people, that's almost the hardest part of it, is to come up with some concise few sentence summary of what this precept really means in my life and my commitment to it today, and to write it down. So we would take each one over about a month or so, and then at the end, there was a little talk that you had to give about your experience with it, which I think was probably the first time I got up and gave a talk in front of a group of people like that. And then a Jukai ceremony. It was
Did you sew your own rakusu or buy one?
We did sew our own rakusus, and I love that process. Unfortunately, I can't teach it. I don't have the sewing, and so currently my students are buying theirs, but I really would love to be able to get the skills to be able to teach it, because it's such a beautiful process of sewing it as you're doing the precept training.
I can introduce you to a rakusu sewing teacher if you're interested.
Yes, yeah. I would actually be interested, because
her name is Valerie Beer, and I think she lives. Where does she live? I think in the Bay Area. How do I not know that? Well, anyway, yeah. So that's what I'd recommend.
Yeah, because I would love to be able to carry the sewing practice onward for the students who train with me.
Mm-hmm. So you took the precepts. You went to Jukai, and could you talk a bit about how your practice with Diane went over the years? Did it evolve? Was it pretty much just the same?
So, I just, the wonderful thing about working with Diane is that she is such a intuitive and creative teacher. She would, I was working at the time and being the director of this neurology department and dealing with, the difficulties my patients were having, and I was having with the difficulties my patients were having. And so things would show up, and I would, usually have Dokusan with her once a week or every few weeks. And whatever was showing up, that would be what I would bring in. And it was wonderful. It was really very helpful to sort of continue to practice with my life in the center. And the center itself, I began taking leadership roles on at the center and was a practice leader and on the board and doing all of that. And that was its own practice. And so all of that.
What is practice leader? I don't think they have that position when I was
So
there.
we had a position where we had 3 or 4 of us who were more senior, had been around for a while, and were responsible for, Diane wasn't always there, just making sure that things were running the way they should. There was a time I recall, we would, we sit 3 days a week, usually on Monday mornings, Wednesday evenings, and Saturdays. And on Wednesday nights, the practice leader was supposed to say a few encouraging words at the start of the sitting, which was very good training, actually. Say something that's helpful at the start of a sitting. And so we did that, and I think that also might have been my introduction to doing that sort of thing. I began teaching introduction to meditation classes also with her. So gradually my responsibilities at the center got to be more and more.
When she broached Dharma Transmission with you, did that take you by surprise, or was that more of a gradual?
I was a little surprised. It was, I wasn't really expecting it. I thought that I had a lot more work to do. And so, but she really thought that I was ready, and she had kind of started, it was kind of interesting. She didn't bring it up right away. What she made me do first is give a lot of Dharma talks. And
I remember I visited once, and I hadn't been there for decades really, and it was you giving the Dharma talk, actually, coincidentally enough.
Yeah, it was. It got to be, first it was once in a while, once every few weeks, then once every other. And then I was just every other week. We were alternating, and then she'd sort of decided she was going to retire and sort of pulled back. And somewhere along that process, she said that she wanted to give me Dharma Transmission.
So she was testing you out to see if you were up to it, I guess.
I think so. And I can't remember at what point, but I think she decided to give me Dharma Transmission, and then at some point we used to do these retreats at Ralston White, and I remember she started asking me to sit in during Dokusan. That was also it was very uncomfortable, and also quite a change. There was like a real shift there. That is sort of the point at which I got it, that I was going to be teaching this stuff.
How did the Sangha take that transition?
So it was interesting. Diane announced to the Sangha that she was going to be having me sit in on Dokusan, and they had the option to decline it, but that to allow me to sit in was really a gift to the Dharma, which is true, actually. Such a wonderful way to put it. I'll never forget when she said that, because it was like, I felt like, oh, I feel so like I'm invading somebody's Dokusan, and but no, actually, it really was a gift to the Dharma, and I just, was there as kind of the observer, and I didn't say anything initially, and that was, but the first time we did it, after that first block in the morning, it felt different to me. walking into this with the rest of the Sangha. There was some separation that had occurred, I wasn't just one member of the Sangha anymore. And it was both energizing and terrifying and sad all at the same time, all three at the same time.
And so did you sew a new brown rakusu, or was that purchased, or did she get it?
At that point, I purchased it because Diane had sort of decided she wanted to retire, and there wasn't time to sew another one. She wanted to do the transmission ceremony long enough that I could actually do the ceremony to take over, and while she was still kind of around.
Right, makes sense. Was it a traditional Soto transmission ceremony, or was it kind of its own?
It was its own ceremony, I think. I actually don't know that this sort of
private. I guess was it private or public?
We did it in private. We did do a private transmission ceremony.
Was there like 3 documents and stuff like that? Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like it was more of a traditional Soto one then. And then, but you're not ordained, is that correct?
That's right. I'm not ordained. I'm a lay teacher, and I'm happy with that, actually.
I remember, I was practicing with Diane for a while, and I always assumed she was a lay teacher. But then there was some ceremony, and she came out with her like okesa and robes. I was like, "Whoa, what is this?" Yeah. So she was ordained, which
she was ordained. And
I didn't even know that until I was already pretty established student with her. Yeah. But yeah, so there was never any talk of getting ordained or anything like that.
No, we never talked about it. And I actually, this feels like enough right now. It feels like enough for me.
So you've been a teacher for a couple of years now. What do you see as, have you found your approach to teaching Zen changing? Is there any challenges you haven't expected? Like just in general, if you could talk a little bit about your role as a teacher and what that experience is like.
So it's interesting. It's coming up on 3 years, and I still feel like I'm a total neophyte beginner. It's so weird. I thought that I would, just have this, but it's still a process, and I've gotten, I think, more comfortable with the role, and with what I teach and where I teach from, the place here. The other thing that's really hard is, I'm not Diane, and Diane's been the teacher for this group for 30 years. I have to sort of find my own way and what works for me and for the students I teach. And I'm still, I think, navigating that. I find that I have a much different style than Diane does. I don't tend to be sometimes as direct, I think, as she and some other teachers are. Just not me. And I just have to, work.
I remember she was pretty effective at calling me on my bullshit,
Yeah. Yeah. She's very, very, very good at that. I like to think that I point stuff out to people, but I'm not as good at just, cutting things off or being as blunt as I probably could be or should be. So it's still a work in progress, I think, for me.
What do you see as the separation, if any, between what maybe we could call psychological issues versus practice issues? Clearly some people need to see a therapist, right? That's just a reality, right?
Yeah.
And there's probably continuum where, like, how do you play along that, where do you draw that line, if any, and like, how do you work with that in general?
It's a really good question, and I don't think it has a very straightforward answer, especially if you sort of look at our Ordinary Mind School, which does, I think, acknowledge or take in psychological issues much more deeply than in some other traditions. So, if you look at Joko's book, especially the last one she wrote, where there's all this talk about, core beliefs and false core beliefs and those things that are holding this false sense of self together. So sometimes those beliefs get to be pretty overwhelming, and there's not an easy way to work with them. And if somebody's, really suffering with what looks like severe psychological issues, I think that person, I usually direct them to get psychological counseling or help. But what that point is, I think it's sometimes very difficult to see, and I though if someone is having major disturbances in their thinking, really severe distress, I might, and I'm not making any progress either with them, or don't feel like I have what I can offer them from the teaching and the tradition, I would probably move them on to a therapist, or so fortunately I haven't had to encounter that very much so far, but it is a question that Zen isn't psychotherapy, I don't think. I know that that's a controversial point, and there are some people who disagree, and there are psychotherapists who are trained as Zen teachers who do both, but I'm not a psychotherapist. So your question is very good, and I don't have a very good answer for it.
Oh, that was a great answer. Tell me if you think this is true or false. I mean, here's how I conceptualize it: is like, let's say there's like a hot pad in front of you, right? And you put your hand on the hot pad, and at some point, it makes sense, if it gets too hot, to pull your hand off, right? Right? Like, it hurts, and you have the option of making it not hurt, so you pull your hand off, right? But let's say your hand is like tied to the hot pad, and you just kind of, and the pain's going to be there, and there's really no option to move your hand. To me, I kind of see like psychotherapy, or psychological growth in general, is when it's rational, pull your hand off. If there's a way of relieving pain, by all means, do it. But there's some things there's just not an option to pull your hand off that hot pad, and I really think that's where, at least in my practice, that's where Zen comes to play. It's more about, I hate to say accepting because it's so cliche, but it really is about just allowing it to be, and kind of take away the narratives,
Yes.
Whereas, where maybe psychology is more about examining those narratives and seeing how they're maybe not real and stuff. Whereas Zen is kind of like, those narratives just aren't even real in the first place, But still, if you can pull your hand off the hot pad, it's stupid not to, and
Yes.
that's kind of where I've evolved to view it. Do you agree? Do you disagree?
No, I agree. I think a lot of what comes into discussions with me, or things like that, here's this issue in my life, and this is the way I'm thinking about it. And yes, there's something to be worked with, some way to get off the hot pad, or and then some of them are, if someone came in with something that is persistent and it's not getting better and creating a lot of distress, and it seems like there's a way to get off the hot pad, but they're just not doing it, then that would be the place to direct them to the psychotherapist or to a psychologist. The other questions are things that really go to sort of deeper existential questions that aren't so much things that a psychiatrist or a psychologist are going to be very helpful with, I don't think. And those are the places where I think the practice really shines. And
There's no pulling your hand off the hot pad on that.
there's no hot pad. There's, I'm being in this body and I'm going to die. And what about that? And, what's all that about? And what's, and I think that's the place where the practice really is very helpful.
Yeah. Right. So do you, as part of your training or any training that you provide now, did you guys do any work with traditional koans, either as a group or individually? Like, did you ever march through a koan collection with Diane, or do you do that with your students, either individually or as a group or anything like that?
So I am still marching through koan collection with Diane. I still work with Diane, and it's an ongoing process for me. And I worked through a bunch of them. The ones I've worked through and feel like I at least understand to some degree, I will incorporate into my teaching. Like if I give a talk and I want to use that point that the koan is making, I'm okay to sort of put the koan out there. But I'm not doing a lot of koan work yet. I say yet, I think it will be part of the teaching I do, but I have a lot of humility in this koan business, and really have talked with Diane about it, and don't feel that it would serve me or my students who I currently have to be doing koan work with them yet. I really feel like there needs to be some ripening and deepening here first. And so.
Great.
Yeah.
So kind of the last major thing I wanted to touch on before we go, and we can talk about other things too if you want. So you're a neurologist. Is anything that you've learned from that world been able to play over in the Zen world? Like, are there any insights that you've gleaned from understanding how the brain works that's influenced your Zen practice at all, either teaching or your practice yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question. I almost feel like my initial answer is no, but clearly that's wrong. I think that I have a really good physiologic knowledge of how the brain works. And, especially emotion, thought, that sort of link there, and the physiology that's happening there. And I think that definitely influences my teaching. I don't think there's anything unique about that, though. I think, though, why I'm doing what I'm doing is because at some point, it feels like the neurological answers break down, don't quite get to the truth of the whole thing. And I know there's lots of studies on the neurology of Zen meditation, and what's happening in the nervous system, and the and training different frequencies of brain activity as we sit. And for me, that's all real interesting, but somehow it feels like it almost misses the point. And so I can't say that I've stayed as fiery curious about that as I probably should.
Yeah, I think
just more interested in exploring Dogen, I think, than exploring what my thalamus is doing as I meditate. I don't know.
Yeah, so I personally am very interested in that stuff, and just how to, not even like on a practical practice, like even if it has no applicability to my practice, I just find it interesting, right? So I do a lot of reading about it and stuff. But what I found is interesting is, for an established practitioner who's already practicing, you're seeing it, and you're seeing the transformations in your life. You don't really, or at the very least, you have a role model where it's clearly, has worked for them,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
you don't really need, you don't need to know that kind of stuff. But I have noticed for people just getting into practice, when you can point out to them, like, here's why this works, and here's like actual, like, quantifiable,
Uh-huh.
that's actually works, for that demographic, I find it really powerful,
Yeah,
like,
that's a good point. Actually, I think to be able to say, okay, well, here is, somebody who can show these are changes in your MRI as you sit, or there's lots of studies applying mindfulness meditation, which is probably the one that's got the most sort of clinical grip on it, to a variety of medical conditions and showing benefit. And a lot of them are more association type studies. So there's clearly, a huge body of literature about the benefit of doing the practice. But as you're saying, after you've practiced for a while, you say, okay, that's all nice, but what's going on here? I just want to sit. There's this deep knowledge that doesn't seem to matter what the MRI scan shows, or the quantitative EEG mapping, or whatever tool you're going to use to try and investigate, well, what's going on there. Maybe that's why I don't have as much interest in it.
Yeah, makes sense. So anything else you'd like to visit before
very nice chatting with you.
I really appreciate it. If someone wanted to get a hold of you, is it best to get a hold of you through Bay Zen Center? Or?
Yeah, I think that's the best way, is through Bay Zen Centers.
I'm trying to remember the
bayzen.org. One word, bayzen.org, I think, is the website. We come up really quickly in a Google search also. Search Bay Zen Center.
And are you guys still located near Lake Merritt in Oakland?
Yeah, on Grand Avenue in Oakland. And we sit Saturday mornings from 8:30 till noon, and there's usually a Dharma talk around 11 o'clock, and it's sort of alternating sitting and walking up until around 11 o'clock, and there's a short service at 11.
You guys are back in person, right?
We're back in person, yeah. We're wearing N95 masks and trying to keep the windows open a little bit, but we're doing everything in person. It's just so much more powerful to sit together in person, even with the masks a little bit. So.
For people who live at a distance, do you offer a hybrid kind of online version as well?
Yeah, we do. The links are there's a way to get the links on our website, and we sit on Monday mornings from 7 to 8. We just sit together online, and it seems so strange sitting online, but there's something about, we kind of have everybody sort of keep their cameras open if they can, face the camera. And so there's this space that we're all sitting in. It's kind of this online Zendo. It seems to work. And on Wednesdays, we do the same. We sit at the center on Grand at 6:30 to 7:30 for an hour. And the Saturday and Wednesdays are also available online. We just kind of put a camera in the Zendo, and so that you can sit with us.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.